So Anthony Hudson, thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure, Sean.
I've actually, because we're here at Fox Footy, the whole Mike Sheehan open mic concept, I've actually got a bit of an intro for you. Do you mind if I read it out?
Sure.
So in the commentary game, he's definitely in the elite category. With all of his experience, you can liken him to a Geelong star Stephen Johnson. Skillful, confident, with a little bit of a rebellious streak. And in the lead up to the 2014 AFL Grand Final, he's been kind enough to give us a few moments of his time. Is that an accurate comparison?
Oh, I wouldn't think I've ever been compared to Stevie J before, but I'm not going to turn it down, so that's fine.
Your commentary resume boasts a lot of amazing sports. I mean, tennis, golf, cricket, motorsport, swimming, and of course AFL. Is there any sport that you're not comfortable in commentating on?
Horse racing. Wasn't really a horse racing fan. It wasn't growing up. It wasn't big in our family. I can now watch it and know what's going on loosely, but to call would be extremely difficult. I went out to Flemington one day with Peter Donegan many years ago and watched him do it and thought, nah, that's not something I ever want to try. So horse racing, definitely.
How many grand finals is this for you now?
I've done 6 on TV. First one I did on radio was actually 6PR in Perth in 1992, calling West Coast games as I was then back to Perth. So it was West Coast Geelong, so I had to call Geelong losing a grand final as my first one, which was most miserable. So I called it, and then the first one I called for 3AW was 1996. And so I don't know exactly how many radio ones I've done, but 6 for TV and probably 8 or 9 on radio.
Is it still business as usual with the grand finals, or do you still get that kid in a candy store sort of enthusiasm?
It's definitely a different day. I think the one thing I learned after doing it the first time is that it is different and every moment matters, and that's probably the main difference, is that, you know, if you think of great grand final moments, you think of, say, the smother on Revolt from shore. It doesn't have to be at the end. With most games, the big moments are at the end of the game and it's tense and it gets to the end. But with a grand final, there's stuff happening the whole day, and that's probably the one thing that the advice I sort of give to myself is to remind myself each year how big the whole game is. So I actually usually watch last year's grand final on the night before I call the grand final that year, just to remind myself to go through. Oh yeah, that's the sort of stuff that happens in a grand final.
Is there one moment in a grand final that has stuck out, or just one game that is a big memory for you?
It's a good question. For me, calling my first grand final on TV was pretty big. So that was Collingwood-Brisbane 2002. It was a wet day, close game. I remember going to midway through the third, because everyone thought Brisbane would win easily, but midway through the third it was tight. And I remember I hit Quarters, who I was calling with, and we just sort of said, how good's this? So there was great moments. That I think he was calling the Ackermanis goal that day. But there's various great moments over the years, even the ones that I've called the Big Chapman mark. On radio, the Chapman goal, the 2009, the toe poke and all that sort of stuff.
Don't have to relive that too much, do we?
No, I'm happy to go through that whole game if you like. But no, there's various moments. The Leo Barry star, I wasn't calling that game. I was hosting that for Channel 10, but not calling it. So Quarters did a fantastic job of that. So there's great moments. The Goddard mark was brilliant. I was against Collingwood. That was radio, but actually Matty Granlund called that moment. It's funny how you get some moments, you don't get others. So. But yeah, it's just the whole day and the final siren are probably the two biggest things.
We'll go back to some grand final moments, but obviously want to talk about the season as well. Now, we had an exciting Brownlow medal count. What are your thoughts on Matt Priddis? How do you rate him?
Look, he's an outstanding player. I don't think he's truly, in that top echelon of players, but he gets the ball more than anyone else, and that's a pretty good place to start. Probably doesn't get forward enough and kick enough goals to be, the elite midfielder. But I think the way he handled himself afterwards and genuinely humble probably won a lot of people over. So I'm wrapped for him and wrapped for everyone that a rookie can come through and win the Brownlow. It's a terrific story.
There's been a lot of talk about where the game is situated in an aesthetics context. How would you rate how successful this season is?
The finals have been really good. I am in that school that is worried about where the game's headed. I just don't like having the whole game compacted into an eighth on the ground, which is what most of it is. I would much prefer. I went and saw the TAC Cup Grand Final on Sunday, and they have a rule, again, it'd be impossible to have at senior level because it's not actually whistled with a free kick, but they have an understanding that you have to have 2 or 3 players inside your forward 50. And to me, those traditional elements of the game I like, of the game being more spread than what it is at the moment. So I do worry about that. But I mean, the hand skills, particularly the players now, are so much better than what they've ever been before. The defensive skills are so much better, which is part of that is fantastic. I just think we've got to make sure we keep that balance with the attacking side of the game as well.
So say it's hard, you see in the TAC Cup, is there anything that you can think of that would possibly transition into the AFL to fix that?
I think it's just a bit of trial and error, really. A lot of people have suggested 16. That may or may not work. Everyone's really against having zones. To me, that's the only thing that will actually fix it, having zones. But I'm also happy to say let's try everything else before we go to zones, because that is pretty draconian, and it'll annoy a lot of people if we actually do bring that in.
Obviously, there have been some tough times in the last couple of years, and the main one is, of course, the Essendon-Asada crisis that's going on. Where do you see the current situation?
Oh, look, it's such a complex issue. It really is. It's easily the biggest story that's happened in footy since I've been around and covered a lot of the big stories. I haven't had to intricately cover this story, which I'm glad of. I've definitely covered it on radio and done interviews and so forth on it, but I haven't had to report on it day by day, which is good. I think one of the main problems has been how it's been handled by Essendon and by James, and promising so much that it would all come out and his name would be cleared, and then not being able to follow up on that. But it's a mess. It's sad for the players. We all want it to end sooner rather than later, but we just don't know. I can certainly my view at the moment is that the players need to see that evidence before they should. I mean, they need to see what they've got on them before they are forced into a corner and cop to some plea that they don't actually believe that they did.
How bad is this Paddy Ryder situation as well? He's come out to say that he wants there to be compensation for Essendon, but is there a chance that potentially there's that clause? Like, how will that affect the players as well that are still at Essendon and could potentially be poached by other clubs?
I doubt you'll see a mass exodus. I think you'd have to argue that clause, and again, I don't think it'll get to that in the end. They'll do a deal if Paddy really wants to go, and clearly he does. So I don't think it'll get to that, but I think you would have to be able to, prove that you've been disgruntled for a while, and if there's no feedback on that from another player, then I think it'd be pretty hard to prove.
Does James Hird coach next year?
I don't think he will at this stage, but there's obviously some water to be played out under the bridge. If the players successfully fight, the show cause notices, then he may be able to hang on. But once Ryder leaves, I think that makes it very difficult for him. But we'll see. What
about the game? Has the game suffered too much because of this?
It has, but I think the game is very resilient. The competition is so strong. Clubs are genuinely annoyed about how long it's taken and all that sort of stuff. But I think it all bounces back.
Another interesting situation is, of course, the Melbourne in terms of on-field performances and things that have happened in the past. What happens if the Melbourne Paul Roos appointment doesn't see them in a better position when he leaves in 2 years?
It's hard to contemplate that, isn't it? That they can be any worse. You've just got to keep on going. I mean, you can't. Again, they might be able to get some priority picks. The AFL have said no at the moment, but if in 2 years' time there's still a basket case, then they probably will get some further assistance. But you would hope that Roos, you can at least take them with what he can teach them, at least take them off that really bottom rung. And surely the amount of elite talent, I know this didn't happen last time, but the amount of young talent they've still got there could be enough to get them at least up a little bit and give their supporters some hope.
At the halfway point, there was definite improvement, but did the second half of the year just see them almost go back to where they were at the beginning of the season?
It's a long season, young players, all that sort of stuff. You hope that that's what it was. I am concerned though that in teaching them too much about the defensive side of the game, that it's still such a significant bridge to be able to cross to get to that attacking side and getting enough score on the board. So, but they'll get some more. They'll get busy and they'll get some more talent in. Hopefully, they can get something for Mitch Clark and get another top draft pick in, and their young kids will just be that little bit older. So, fingers crossed.
Did they deserve a priority pick?
My views changed a little bit on this. My view was definitely not because how they wasted things. But in talking to a few people and analysing the impact that the actual draft has, I wouldn't be adverse to them getting a second round pick or just another player to get in. But as long as it's after every other club's had one crack at it.
Which coach will be under the most pressure in next season?
Well, I would have said Sando, but he's obviously gone. Next one was probably...
Are you surprised about that?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was surprised. The Port Adelaide factor was big in that, no doubt. I went over one of the games mid-year and I remember talking to a few people coming over there and I came back and I actually said, I didn't say it on air, probably wish I had it. I said, I think Sanderson's in trouble. Because the love for Hinckley and the love for what Port Adelaide have done, it puts enormous pressure on a team like the Adelaide Crows. So I think that was definitely part of it. But yeah, Brendan McCartney, Nathan Buckley, it's going to be fascinating the early part of the year.
All right, just a hypothetical. You're the AFL CEO and you're a bit strapped for cash. What about your grand final entertainment? Would you take Angry Anderson or Meatloaf?
No, I'd just play a tape.
What's the biggest problem facing the AFL right now?
I think overall it is equalisation. It's those clubs that just can't make the same... The disparity in not just gate returns, membership, even gaming revenue. I think Hawthorn makes about $7 million a year out of gaming revenue. Richmond make about 70,000, so 700. So you're $6 million behind. Collingwood are however many million ahead of North Melbourne on membership before they've even started. So it is that disparity, and as the numbers get bigger and the gap gets wider, that becomes a bigger issue for sure. But I also think the aesthetics of the game is still something I have pretty high on my list. You
said equalisation. Can the AFL ever achieve true equalisation?
Probably not true, but they need to get to be able to bring the gap back a little bit. There are some things that are almost endemically built into what we've got with the Friday night. The teams that get the Friday nights get the most exposure, therefore, and the blockbuster games, they get the more sponsors and more money and more likely to get young kids to barrack for them. So because they're a bigger club, so there's some things that are a bit of a continuing cycle, which the AFL could change, but because it would mean getting less revenue, they don't change.
The Collingwood Fan Forum, were you for that or against that?
Anything that engages the fans, as long as it's reasonably genuine. I mean, a lot of these things are just lip service, but as long as I think there's something in that, and actually getting to hear from the fans. There's one thing Collingwood have led the way in is engaging with their fans and getting the real feel for what their fans want, and they've been able to use that information to drive their membership so successfully.
Etihad Stadium roof opened or closed?
I think it's closed at the moment. No, I'd have it closed. I can see the argument, for the fans' point of view, but the sun's in the eye of half the people there. It's shocking on TV, particularly early in the year. So I would have it closed.
What are your thoughts on Good Friday football?
I don't think we need it. I think there's enough footy. Maybe I just want the day off. I'm not sure, but I honestly don't think we need it. There's so many other days of football, but it'll come in.
Does Sydney deserve the cost of living allowance?
I've got no issue with it as long as it's administered in a more clinical fashion, with the AFL giving the money and making sure that all, every player gets their percentage of it, which is where we're headed with it. So I think if it's real, then a little bit, but not too much.
With your super coach team, would you choose Dyson Heppel first or Nat Fyfe?
I think super coach, just where the ball, who hits the target matters, doesn't it? So, yeah. I love Fyfe. I think I'll still go with Fyfe anyway.
So we had a couple of Twitter questions like I was telling you about.
Sure.
So Ash Shankar asks, should commentators with an allegiance to a club be able to call a game involving their team?
I think practically yes. I don't think, certainly from a calling point of view, I don't think it makes any difference. As allegiance, one thing, actually working for the club is another. I think it's better that people like Eddie and JB don't call their club's games. I think that's just better and easier for everybody. From a purely commentary point of view, though, I think that's ridiculous if you don't call. If you can't be professional enough to put that bias aside, then you shouldn't be doing it. And how every now and then we might slip and say something, or it's more the perception that people get upset by. I'm more likely to say an anti-Geelong thing than a pro-Geelong thing. But there's no doubt that there is that perception there, and that's something that TV has to deal with. I think it's probably more an issue with the expert commentators if they're working at a club or still have some really close alignment to a club. That's more difficult.
Sally White asks, how can the AFL better promote women's involvement in playing the game?
I think they're doing it. I think the women's football is a really big growth area. I know I've got an 8-year-old, I've got 3 daughters, and I've got an 8-year-old daughter who is annoyed that women's footy is not on TV. And it's hard to explain to her why it isn't. And I think the quality of women's footy is getting better and better from what I've seen. So, look, it'll be small steps, but I think the AFL are doing it, definitely putting more resources into it. And if they can get the media partners along, then that will help.
Anthony Hudson, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.